I just made a crosscut sled, and I thought I'd go over some of the advantages and disadvantages of them that I know of anyway. I'll start with the disadvantages. This is a fairly large one, and it has a lot of the bells and whistles that I thought was kind of cool. The problem with me is in my small shop there's going to be a very difficult place, or very difficult to find a place to store it. One of the other disadvantages is you can't use the blade guard with this, so you'll have to be careful of the blade, but there's a lot of other safety advantages too. You can still use the riding knife though. One of the advantages of the crosscut sled is it's going to be a lot more accurate than the miter gauge that came with your saw. That's fairly small and doesn't really support the piece very well. I got this whole front fence aligned within 2.4 thousandths of an inch of the blade, so that's going to make some pretty 90-degree cuts there. The front fence will also help with kickback because it's going to hit the front fence rather than hitting you or flying back and hitting something else in the shop. I have two tracks to put the miter piece onto that I can use the bolts and the tracks and then screw those down onto that miter piece. Also, I can use those tracks for hold downs for smaller pieces. I'm just going to mount a little piece of wood on these with two bolts that will come up or will be on the track that you can move these or slide these back and forth and then clamp a piece down. There's other clamps too, I'll put in the description down below, some links to those. The crosscut sled also works like a zero clearance insert, so you're going to have minimal tear out when making your cuts. The front fence also has the Craig top track mounted onto it that I can slide this stop block onto. I'll have links to those down below. So I can make multiple cuts with the stop block of the exact same length of pieces, which is really super nice. The blade does end up going through the crosscut sled, so you do have to be careful when you're pushing it. It does have these blocks that will go around where the blade comes out, but if you just kept pushing, you could push right through that block. If your hand was on it, that would be bad. If you stop where you would normally stop when it's all the way cut through a piece, it's not going to come out the back of that guard. One of the advantages to this sled, or one of the bells and whistles, is it has a miter fence that you can add to it. And so I built this, and it has tracks on the edge for stop blocks, and you can cut 45s with this. This also has a guard for the blade that will come through so that you won't get cut. One of the reasons I decided to build a crosscut sled is because when I'm cross-cutting with this, the board, if it's a pretty big board like this, is sitting on the table saw top, which doesn't move. When I slide this back and forth, it's dragging across the tabletop. Well, what happens is, well, I can hold this tight. This board ends up pulling just slightly this way, just like this. I mean, but so slight, it really looks like this is pretty straight until I try to put it together, and it's obviously not straight, just because it pulls like that. Where on a crosscut sled, this whole thing would be sitting on top of the crosscut sled. The whole sled moves. This board stays on the sled and doesn't move, and it ends up being cut a lot straighter. I've got a link to the video where I made this crosscut sled, and don't forget to check the description area out for links of the parts I used and things like that. This is based on Nick Ferry's crosscut sled. If you liked this, hit like and subscribe. Thanks.